The trees began to lean in long before Mayrin noticed. What started as a shaded road through ordinary woodland had transformed into something more sinister, branches arching overhead like ribs in a cathedral built for something long dead. The sun, though not yet set, had become a stranger behind the high boughs. Mayrin adjusted her pack and kept walking. She had followed the map exactly. Hollowmere lay at the end of the old road, hemmed in by the Briar Hollow woods. There were no inns, no milestones, just a stretch of dirt path forgotten by carts and overgrown in creeping green. She was told by a man in the last village that nobody went this way anymore. He didn't say why. Mayrin didn't ask. She hadn't come for company. The deeper she walked, the more the forest changed. The air grew damp and mossy, thick with the smell of old wood and decaying leaves. Twigs cracked underfoot in strange patterns, like they snapped themselves, not under her weight. The birds had long since stopped singing. She passed a series of carved wooden totems, each depicting a faceless figure with antlers, their heads bowed. They stood on either side of the path like mourners, rotting and slick with lichen. One had a red thread tied around its wrist, knotted tightly. She didn't stop to inspect it. She told herself she didn't care. But the silence began to claw at her thoughts. By the time she saw the first house, she was counting her breaths just to remind herself she still lived. Hollowmere was smaller than she expected. A scattering of crooked cottages built of stone and sod, their thatch roofs green with moss and sagging in the middle. Smoke curled from only two of the chimneys. The fields beyond were overrun with black-needled ferns. A narrow creek traced the village's edge, filled not with fish but slow, dragging fog. The place looked deserted. But it wasn't. A boy stood at the edge of the village square, watching her. He couldn't have been older than 12. His skin was pale as candle wax, and his eyes were too still. Not shy, observing. Like he was trying to memorize her before she vanished. Mayrin raised a hand. "Hello." The boy didn't wave back. He turned and walked briskly away, vanishing behind one of the larger cottages. Mayrin exhaled slowly. A door creaked open ahead. An older woman, hunched and hollow-cheeked, stood in the frame of a low house. Her white hair was braided back like ropes of ash, and her eyes were dark but clear. She held a wooden staff and did not smile. "You're early," the woman said. Mayrin blinked. "Do I know you?" "No. But you're here." The woman turned. "Come inside. Before the sun goes down." Mayrin hesitated, but the woods behind her pressed too close, and the air held a chill that hadn't been there moments ago. She followed the woman inside. The cottage smelled of herbs, smoke, and something faintly coppery. The fire crackled in a small hearth. Dried bundles of roots and flowers hung from the ceiling. A table stood at the center, its wood deeply scarred with knife marks. The old woman gestured for her to sit. "My name is Elda," she said. "I keep the rights here." "You're Mayrin, from Bale's Way." Mayrin flinched. "How?" "You wrote for lodging." And silence. "You said you would pay in coin or labor." She hadn't told anyone she was coming except in one letter. Elda's eyes narrowed, reading her face. "There are no secrets here." Not for long. Mayrin wanted to leave then. But the memory of what she had left behind, an apartment full of rotting food, a locked bathroom door, blood on the tiles, froze her to the floor. She nodded slowly. "Yes. That's right." Elda's voice softened just slightly. "You'll stay in the north cottage. No one lives there now. Keep your fire low at night. Don't light candles after midnight." Mayrin frowned. "Why?" "Just don't." Outside, the fog had begun to move. The north cottage had no lock on the door. Mayrin didn't ask for one. She unpacked in silence, her fingers moving without thought. A single bed, a cracked mirror, a shuttered window. Dust on everything. But the fireplace was clean and ready. Someone had left a stack of peat bricks beside it. She set a fire and sat on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the flames dance. At first, she thought it was just the wind. A whisper, too soft to make out, brushed against her ear. She turned sharply, nothing. Only shadows and smoke. Another voice, a breath against her neck this time. Still no words. Just shape, suggestion, like memory forgotten mid-thought. Maren stood and checked the window. It was shut. But on the glass, smeared in fog or breath, was a handprint. Small. 5 fingers. The middle one crooked slightly to the side. She wiped it clean, heart hammering, and turned away. She did not sleep that night. The next morning, Elda gave her work. Gathering water from the stream, chopping wood, cleaning the abandoned barn. The villagers did not speak to her. They stared, always from a distance, always silent. Some wore strings of bone around their necks. Others had red threads braided into their hair. When Maren asked Elda about the totems in the woods, the old woman only said, "They keep the watchers dreaming." Who are the watchers? Best not to ask that either. On the third day, Maren saw something impossible. She was near the edge of the ferns, dumping slop from the village's one still used in. As she turned, she glimpsed something between the trees, a figure. Tall. Too tall. With limbs like branches and a crown of antlers. Its face was wrong, stretched and eyeless, mouth hung slightly open like a question never asked aloud. She blinked. It was gone. When she told Elda, the old woman stared at her for a long time, then simply said, "You've been noticed." That night, Maren dreamed of vines crawling down her throat, of being buried under roots that whispered her name. She woke to find red thread tied around her wrist. Tightly. No knot she could undo. She cut it with a knife, and it bled when she pulled it off. On the 7th day, the bells rang. They came from the chapel, an ancient stone ruin near the creek. No one ever went there. But that morning, the bells rang on their own. Elda was waiting when Maren arrived, standing at the edge of the square with the other villagers. Everyone had gathered. Even the boy she had seen on her first day. He wore a mask now, painted wood, shaped like a stag's face. Elda pointed toward the chapel. "It's your turn." "For what?" But no one answered her. The crowd parted as Maren stepped forward, compelled by something deeper than fear. A silence pressed down around her as she approached the ruin. Ivy dripped from its stones. The door creaked open, and within, the darkness seemed too thick. Like it had weight. She stepped inside. The air was cold and wet and smelled of rot. A single candle burned on the altar, illuminating shapes in the walls, old carvings of antlered figures, forests bleeding people, a woman with her face torn in two. She turned to leave. But the door had vanished. In its place stood a mirror. And in the mirror, Maren did not look like herself. Her eyes were black pits. Her hair crawled with worms. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, and something moved behind her reflection, towering and slow, crowned in antlers. The candle flickered. The whisper returned. This time, it spoke. "You carry the hollow. You are the vessel." Maren screamed and struck the mirror with her fist. It shattered. The candle went out. And when she opened her eyes again, she was back in her cottage, hand bleeding, the red thread once again tied around her wrist. Outside, the village was silent. But from the trees came a sound like breathing. Slow. Patient. Watching. Waiting. Maren didn't leave her cottage for 2 days. She burned the red thread. She scrubbed the mirror with lye until the reflection returned to normal, or at least what she thought was normal. The glass still shimmered oddly at night, like something beneath the surface waited for her to fall asleep. When Elda came knocking, Maren didn't answer. She barely ate. She kept the fire low and never lit a candle after dark. She remembered the whisper in the chapel, the phrase etched into her mind like a brand. You carry the hollow. What did it mean? Vessel for what? She had come here to disappear, to bury what she'd done, to forget. Not to be buried herself. On the third night, a knock came again. Not Elda's. Lighter. Hesitant. Maren opened the door. The boy was there, the one with the two still eyes. This time, he held the wooden stag mask in his hands. Miss, he said softly. You have to come. The festival starts tonight. What festival? He blinked. Ash and thorn. Behind him, the village had changed. Torches lined the square. The totems from the forest had been brought in and stood at every corner, their faceless heads turned inward. A great circle of stones had been cleared in the field, and villagers were moving silently, preparing something. I'm not part of this, Maren said, backing away. The boy didn't move. You are now. Elda was waiting by the central fire, dressed in robes of bleached linen, her hair crowned in twisted brambles. Her eyes were painted black, her lips crimson. You've survived the chapel, she said. You've been chosen. I didn't agree to any of this. No one ever does. That's how it works. Villagers circled the fire in silence. They wore wreaths of ash leaves and thorns, their feet bare, their hands painted with red spirals. Children carried bundles of dried herbs and flicked smoke at the totems. A woman began to sing, low and haunting, a melody that felt older than language. What is this for? Maren asked. Elda turned to her. To keep the hollow asleep. And if it wakes? Elda didn't answer. The singing grew louder. Drums began, soft and rhythmic, echoing the heartbeat Maren felt in her throat. The crowd parted, and 3 villagers emerged wearing full-body wooden constructs, effigies. One was crowned with antlers, another with a bird's skull, the last shaped like a crumbling tree. Each one bowed toward Maren. She turned to leave. But the boy from earlier blocked her path. Please, he whispered. You'll make it worse. She looked at him, really looked. His eyes were wet with fear. Not of her. Of what came next. What are they going to do to me? He shook his head. It's not you they're after. Then he slipped away into the crowd. They brought her to the stone circle at the edge of the village. Maren stood inside while the villagers formed a ring around her. The 3 effigies began to chant in harsh, guttural syllables that made her skin crawl. Then Elda stepped forward, holding something wrapped in black linen. She unwrapped it, a mask. It was shaped like a woman's face, smooth and expressionless, carved from bone. Hollow eyes. No mouth. A crown of thorns at the brow. Maren backed away. No. No, I'm not. You wear it, Elda said, voice suddenly sharp. Or the hollow comes. And it won't stop at you. The wind rose. The flames in the torches flickered sideways. The trees groaned, not in the breeze, but as if something within them stirred. Elda stepped closer. Put it on. The crowd had gone utterly still. Even the forest held its breath. Maren looked at the mask. Something in her screamed to run. But something deeper whispered, this has already happened. You came here because you knew. She took the mask. And placed it over her face. It was not like wearing anything. It was like becoming something else. She saw herself from above, her body a doll beneath strings, her thoughts scattering like dust in a storm. Voices poured through her mind, not her own, not quite human. Names that no tongue should speak. Shapes of things buried beneath the roots of time. She felt the village shrink beneath her, felt the bones of the land crack and shift. She saw herself digging. Not with hands, with antlers. And at the center of the pit, buried under centuries of peat and sorrow, something opened, an eye made of rot. She woke on the ground, breath ragged, mask beside her. The villagers were gone. The torches were cold. The fire nothing but ash. It was dawn. And from the woods came the sound of something walking, dragging itself across the earth with the patience of stone. She ran. Through the trees, down the path, past the twisted totems. She ran until her lungs burned and her vision blurred. The road turned to mud. Her boots slipped. She fell once, twice, rose again. She reached the edge of the woods. The way back to Bale's Way. But the road had vanished. In its place was forest. Unbroken. Endless. Behind her, something snapped a branch. She turned, breath freezing. But nothing came. Only the silence. The kind that listens. Maren returned to Hollowmere. There was nowhere else. She found Elda alone in the chapel, sweeping ashes into a circle. I saw it, Maren whispered. Under the earth. Elda nodded. It's always there. The hollow sleeps beneath us. We sing, we burn, we sacrifice. But it remembers. Why me? Because you are hollow too. Maren wanted to deny it. But she remembered the blood. The locked door. The girl she couldn't save. The reason she came here at all. I'm not like you, Maren whispered. Elda's voice was low. You're more like us than you know. She stepped forward and pressed something into Maren's hand. It was a stone, smooth and dark. Carved with the same spiral as the totems. What is this? A key. To what? Elda's eyes glinted. To remembering. That night, Maren did not sleep. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Outside, the forest breathed. And from far below, deep in the soil, something stirred. Something waiting. The stone Elda had given her was warm. Maren turned it in her fingers as she sat at the edge of the creek, the fog curling around her legs like a living thing. The spiral carved into the surface felt deep, almost too deep for such a small object. It pulsed faintly in her hand, like a heartbeat out of sync with her own. What does it open? She whispered, though she already knew. It wasn't a key for a door. It was a key for a mind. Hollowmere had changed. Or maybe Maren had changed, and the village had always been this way. She saw things now, the stains on the stone walls that weren't just mold, but runes, half erased. The patterns in the smoke that rose from the chimneys, forming faces she almost recognized. The way the shadows of the trees reached farther than they should. The villagers no longer avoided her. They nodded when she passed, as if she were one of them. As if she belonged. She didn't like it. When she asked Elda about the mask and what she had seen while wearing it, the old woman gave a tight-lipped answer. It lets you see the shape beneath the skin of things. Maren frowned. Is that what happened to all of you? You saw too much. No, Elda said softly. Some of us didn't see enough. That's why it came. That night, the boy returned. He knocked once and stood outside her cottage, holding a lantern. His eyes were rimmed with soot. His fingers, stained red. You're bleeding, Maren said. It's not mine, he replied. They're doing the preparation. For what? For the hollow to speak. He reached into his coat and handed her a folded scrap of parchment. She unfolded it carefully. There was no writing. Only a drawing. A tree, gnarled and leafless, standing over a pit of writhing limbs. Beneath it, a symbol that looked like the spiral on the stone, but broken, fractured into 4 shards. Maren looked up. The boy was gone. The next morning, Maren returned to the chapel. It was empty, but the candle on the altar had been relit. The mirror she had shattered was whole again, its surface undisturbed. She did not look into it. Instead, she touched the altar. Cold stone, worn smooth by generations of use. A seam ran down its middle. She pressed the spiral stone into the crack. It sank into the rock with a soft click. The floor shifted beneath her. Beneath the chapel was a staircase, old and narrow, lined with roots and damp stone. The walls were etched with carvings older than writing, horned beasts, open mouths, figures kneeling beneath branches. Maren descended slowly, the torch in her hand casting flickering shadows. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a cavern. There were no walls, only roots, long, snaking things that hung like curtains from a ceiling lost in darkness. The air smelled of wet bark and decay. Pools of water glistened under the torchlight, disturbed now and then by unseen movements. At the center of the cavern was a mound of soil. Half buried in it stood a tree. It was unlike any tree Maren had seen, its bark pale and blistered, its branches sharp and jagged like broken bones. It pulsed faintly with a reddish glow, like embers beneath the skin. The hollow. Or what was left of it. She approached. Her ears rang with whispers, not voices, exactly, but intentions. Shapes of thought that barely brushed understanding. They filled her head like fog. You have carried it. You remember what we do not. I don't understand, Maren said aloud. Her voice sounded small in the cavern. You carry the wound. The vessel remembers. Through you, we are made again. I'm not part of this, she said. But her hand reached out and touched the bark. Pain exploded through her mind. She stood in another time. The village was whole and alive, bright with sunlight, children laughing, fields thick with green. But at the center stood the tree, larger than before, radiant and terrible. Around it, villagers knelt. They were chanting. One of them, a woman with Maren's face, stepped forward and raised a knife. The crowd cried out. The sacrifice had been chosen. A girl was bound at the base of the tree. Young. Pale. Maren remembered her. Lena. Her sister. The knife came down. The tree drank deep. Maren screamed as she tore herself from the vision. She was back in the cavern, crumpled beside the roots, her hand bleeding. She had been here before. Not just in dreams, not just through the mask. She had been born here. When she returned to the village, the sky was black. Not just clouded, blotted out, like something immense pressed down over the world. The villagers were gathered in the square, their faces painted with ash. Elda stood at the center, staff in hand. You remember, she said, not a question. Maren nodded, throat dry. My sister. I gave her to it. Elda didn't look surprised. You were the last vessel. Before the forgetting. Before you fled. I tried to escape it. I thought I made it all up. You buried it. You buried yourself. But the hollow does not forget. And now it calls for balance. Maren's voice shook. I won't do it again. Elda's expression softened. You already have. The villagers parted. The boy stood between them. Tears streaked his face. He held the mask. I don't want to go, he whispered. Maren backed away. No, I didn't. You called it with memory. With the key, Elda said. Now it answers. The drums began. The singing started again, low and terrible, a dirge of roots and bones. They handed her the mask. This time, she did not put it on. She turned and ran. The forest swallowed her. The totems stared as she passed, their blind faces weeping threads of red. She ran until she collapsed, sobbing in the mud. Above her, the trees moaned. Something massive stirred beneath her feet. It was rising. The hollow had been waiting.